Hello, I'm Joanna Pionevis, creator and host of Exhibitionistas, and this is the first episode of the segment My Art Tools, where I take you to two artist studios by asking a simple question which unexpectedly reveals quite a few secrets and stories from the creative source itself. And the sources in question are Anouk Mercier, an artist who is now based in France but has lived many years in the UK and still teaches at UE Bristol, and Marina Roca, who is based in Madrid and has currently, at the time of recording and release of the episode, so the 3rd of October 2025, an exhibition at the El Chico Gallery in her hometown, which we mention during the episode. Because the artists were interviewed in their studios and show a few things to the camera, this may be an episode you might want to watch on Spotify or YouTube, but the audio experience works too if that's what you prefer. That's not a problem. If you want to know more about the artists, I would recommend going on Instagram and following Exhibitionistas, or even better, signing up to the newsletter to learn more about them and also to get the links and little gems that didn't make it to the episode there. For those who may not know, the Exhibitionistas files are part of my page, Joanna Pionevis, on Substack, and I don't send informative newsletters because I really don't enjoy that. And if I fill in your inbox and spend time promoting each episode, it has to be for a better cause. So by signing up, you get to access a different kind of information and also all of my texts and a lot of other posts on Substack that are not newsletters. I don't have anything under a paywall, and I'd love to keep it that way, so donations are appreciated, either through the website, exhibitionistaspodcast.com, or Substack, or even buy me a coffee. All those links are in the show's notes, or if you go to Substack, obviously you have the subscription button function at the top of the screen, I think. You'll find it. Anyway, let's move on to the episode. Allow me to plead my case. What if I told you that the tools used by artists are absolutely fascinating and may hold the key to an understanding of their work from within? We create myths in art, right? Based on the images and documents we have at hand. Pollock with the drip paintings, for instance. But what if we looked closely at other practices and gestures? What if we paid attention? And also, what if you had someone who would bring these informations to you? And that's what I'm here for. Artists use unexpected tools or familiar ones in unexpected ways. I'm not looking for the spectacular here, although it might happen, but for the sensible shift that suddenly opens a panoramic view on a work of art or a whole body of work. But another thing that led me to think more intentionally about this topic was an exhibition at the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, dedicated to Raphael's drawings. When I went there, I expected to see a few sketches, and indeed the exhibition had exquisite works. But there weren't only sketches or projects. There were these sorts of screens, or what I now know to be called cartoons, with holes on the outline of the figures. And in fact, these cartoons are full-size drawings used to transfer the structure or the composition of the figure, carefully tested and defined previously through drawing, onto a wall or onto whatever surface the painting is going to be on by pouncing or tracing. So it means that those little holes, they were intentional, they were there for a purpose. The purpose was to then apply powdered charcoal or black chalk on the drawing so that the little dots would be marked on the surface to then be painted on. There was a table there with a display of all the tools that Raphael used. So when you think of painting, when you think of drawing, you think of pencil, you think of graphite, and you think of brushes and paints. And what the display included were colored chalks and charcoal, metal points, which are rods of metal alloys, so gold, silver, copper, or lead, that left microscopic particles on paper. And so the color of the line would depend on the composition of the rod. Pen and ink. He used a blind stylus, which was used to sort of try out different shapes without marking the paper. And a compass, so a double pointed compass. So you can see there was a lot of precision. None of this is in the catalogue, which I promptly bought because I really wanted to study that. And in my research for the episode, I noticed that only 2 articles mention in passing this display of tools in the exhibition, enumerating what I just told you, and not what I have on my Instagram, because I took a picture of that display and I looked it up now. This was in 2017. And in the picture I took, there's a reed pen and a fine brush. So, of course, this is not to criticize anyone here, but I do feel that we look at art more like historians and less like technologically savvy people with curious minds and who actually know how to handle stuff and can very quickly put ourselves in the minds of the people who are creating. Historians are obsessed with timelines and influences, which is funny to me, knowing how much artists lie about dates. So the Renaissance, after all, when I left that exhibition, I thought associates imagination with science, chemistry with observation. But mostly, how silly, the myth of the artist painting from nothing. And also, to me at least, how uninspiring. It's as if everything came from the inside, as if the artist didn't spend countless times adjusting the material to the imaginations, but also perhaps the imagination to the material. The precision of the transfer and the care in using a double-pointed compass shows the importance of the final image, the painting. The Italian Renaissance feels to me more cinema than free representation. It is more seductive than inspirational, and it's closer, bear with me, to the convincing power of deepfakes almost than the compulsions of surrealism. Especially when you know how the images are made, you look at them in a completely different way. So Anouk and I talked precisely about the playfulness of this dynamic between the tool and the image, the project, the making, and the outcome, before she told me what her favorite tool was.
Drawing can be anything you have at hand, really. And so, often that is, just biro and a piece of paper or pencil, but it can be other things. You can be out walking and it might be the soil underfoot that you use with your fingers, a mark of recording. Even if your favorite tool is a graphite stick, is that the best tool for the project that you're working on today? Is it the best tool to translate the object or the scene that you want to record? So I would say in terms of teaching, actually, my approach is the opposite to having a favorite tool. Sometimes you have an idea and that is the foremost, that's the first thing, that's the starting point. And then the tool, is there to support the idea and to make it come to life. But sometimes a tool will inspire an idea or will drive you towards a certain direction. Which is why, again, if we talk in terms of teaching, but also applied to studio practice, playing is so important, because if you only rely on ideas and, using tools to make those ideas come true, you might actually miss out on something that is experimental, that you wouldn't have planned, that really only stems from playing practice.
I chose my fountain pen, and I think it's because it's very difficult to find the right one. There are thousands of them, and it's a pretty expensive material, expensive tool. My husband, he gave it to me from a trip. I used to live in Berlin, and then from a trip he did in Madrid, he went to the flea market here. And if you search for it, you will find this like stands with like really vintage boxes of thousands of these, and they are pretty cheap for what you can pay in a store. So he was able to buy, I don't know, 5 or 6 for me to try them, and this is my favorite one. So, first of all, the looks. It's like a stylo pen, like black. It's plastic, actually. I think it's like embedded, like it's metal embedded into the plastic, which is a bit strange, but it gives it like this look, like this vintage look. So I really like this one because of the strength of the point, like sometimes you have the tip. Sometimes pens for calligraphy are too hard for drawing. Like you can feel like the paper is scratching, like this feeling. And that I don't like. I like it to have some flexibility in the tip.
While ink is not so important for Marina, Anouk's choice is surprising, as it is as much a tool as it is a material. But it has another component to it. Raphael could not have used it, as opposed to Marina's fountain pen, which is very, very close to the Renaissance materials. Anouk's choice of tool, which is also in some ways a material, is completely dependent upon 20th century technology of the machine.
When you asked me this question, I thought immediately about toner. I always thought that it was just carbon powder, which is what it is. But yesterday, because I was like, I'd better double check that I'm right about this. I found out that it's actually these tiny particles of plastic coated in carbon powder. So I did not know that. So basically, we're talking about toner. So this is, the toner cartridges that all of us have used at some point. They're in most photocopiers. If you've been to really any type of education, they are basically these little plastic particles coated in carbon powder that are then applied to paper using laser technology. And there's an electric charge involved as well. And then it's burnt onto the paper. So the plastic particles melt and literally, sort of cement the carbon powder onto the paper. So toner is literally that carbon dust. For many, many years, I have used it and I never referenced it. So, when people ask you, whatever, to list the materials of an artwork, for years, toner did not feature. I would just say acetone transfer, which is a transfer method that I used with acetone. And basically, what happens in this transfer technique is that I use a toner photocopier. I apply the acetone to the back of the photocopy. The acetone repels the carbon powder and reprints it, so it transfers it back onto another piece of paper. So essentially, it takes that carbon dust that's all over my initial photocopy, and it repels it and pushes the little particles onto the next piece of paper. Everything started from having an idea from 18th century landscapes and etchings in particular being my predominant source of inspiration, let's say, and wanting to appropriate those references into my work. I remember, this does not happen anymore because of health and safety, but when I was an art student on my foundation course, one way of introducing students very quickly to the notions of printmaking was to do acetone transfers. So I remembered that, years ago, foundation, I had tried this technique. I loved how immediate it was. You've got the photocopy, you transfer it, and 2 seconds later you have your transfers. But it really came from, I had an image, I needed to transfer it. How do I do it? Go to the photocopy machine, photocopy, transfer, and move on. And I think there's also something to do with photocopies are so familiar to all of us. They were very unprecious.
We're not that far from the intricate processes that Raphael and other artists of the Renaissance used to work on their shapes, to copy them, to transfer them onto drawings from drawings, and then to the final piece. We're not that far away from a sort of a mechanic handling of the shape through a very, very trained hand. The artists of the Renaissance used mechanical copy of drawings that they were satisfied with, and why waste time making them over and over again, and why not keep them? And perhaps once they're transferred on to the final piece, maybe change them a little bit. And something to note as well is that technique, the pouncing technique, pricking little holes on an outline, was used for tapestries, for example, to reproduce patterns of tapestries and other crafts. So there is also this tension in a technique that is used to make what we call, perhaps with a sense of grandeur, masterpieces. So in some ways, it's really interesting to use 20th century tools in order to look at what was done in the past, play the anachronic game, and try to assess what we try to obtain through these tools that seem so distant and yet kind of produce the same thing, which is to extract images that already exist in order to make new ones. And so that really affects the idea we have of creation and of image making from an artistic point of view, not from an entertainment point of view or from a publicity and advertisement point of view, but really this area, this field of intense creativity, imagination, but also science and research and purpose and intentional experimentation. When looking at the work of both artists, you would not imagine the technical challenges that they both have, nor the physical engagement with the process.
My first kind of, commission, which was to create an artwork for Bristol Museum, I basically, I proposed my whole idea for the commission, which would basically be to photocopy images from their collections to bring their collection back to life through a new artwork, which is, a way of working which I adore, like plunging into history and looking at collections and really finding ways for the, contemporary audiences to re-engage with those, artworks and artists and narratives. So, it was really exciting for me to get an opportunity to work with a museum on this. So I pitched my idea, and everyone agreed, moved forward, was very excited. And at the time, even though I'd graduated, I did all my photocopying at the UE library. So I would sneak back in, even though I wasn't really allowed to. And I would photocopy, and yes, apologies to UE if they're listening to this. I guess, it sounds kind of crazy, but to me, an hour and a half of photocopying images is comparable to a painter going to an art shop and buying tubs of painting. It was my primary source material, right? And you can still see behind me, this is how I do. So I do lots of photocopies, then I put them up on the wall so I see the images, and then I'll select areas of them, cut them out, and then transfer them. And on this occasion, which felt to me like the most important time, I finally had a commission for a museum. I got to the library, did all my photocopying, got back to the studio, sat down, started to make, and it didn't work. It just didn't work. So the photocopies that I had made, I did everything as usual, used the acetone, and nothing happened. So obviously, utter panic. And then I spent a day going around Bristol in all different shops, doing different photocopies to see if it was the photocopier that was different, and all of, just tried lots of different things, and I just couldn't make it work anymore. I ended up actually contacting the photocopying machine producers. I can't remember who it was, and a very helpful person explained to me that it's because the technology was advancing and they were now burning the toner, so burning the carbon powder at much higher temperatures onto the paper, which to them was great because I don't know if you remember this from holding photocopiers, you used to have black fingers afterwards, and that was the toner powder coming off on your hands. So for them, increasing the temperature meant there was no more staining of fingers, but it also more durable, just better quality all around. So basically, he said to me, we're going around replacing all of the photocopiers so that now they burn at much higher temperature. So your technique isn't going to work anymore. The only way to resolve this is that I then did lots of research, spoke to the guys at the various printer companies, printer manufacturers, and identified a model that still used toner at the temperature I needed. And I bought the photocopier, and it's in my studio, and I still have it today. And they still luckily make those toner cartridges for that photocopier. All this to say, I am so not a geeky person. This makes me sound like, I'm really into understanding technology. And actually, I'm really not that kind of person. But the technology I was using has forced me to become a bit of a photocopier geek and a toner geek. And from that day on, I started listing toner as a medium because I was like, it's a very real thing.
Drawing is a much more complex affair when it comes to tools, but also the body. Or perhaps I should say, when it comes to the relation between the body and whatever is used to make the image or the final artwork.
I have a lot of anxiety with my hands, like I'm all the time like needing to do something. Like if I'm in a bar, I'm like squeezing a little napkin or like a piece of paper or like doing something while I talk. And it's very common that I'm touching the lid while I'm drawing. So for me, drawing is something of it's an activity related with this, right? In drawing, in a way, there are no mistakes, but at the beginning, when you start learning, there's a lot of mistakes, So you learn to spot them and to really realize if you want to keep them or not, and in ways like beforehand. So I would say a mistake in a drawing done now for me would be that is like out of composition. Like for me, composition is my problem, because I tend to be very expansive, and so I approach too much to the borders. Sometimes I don't leave space to continue, I expand and expand. I would need more paper, but then but the paper is limited. That's like what constitutes a frame. Like you have to assume the frame before you start. It's a rule from the substance of the material you're using. It's like you cannot assume an infinite frame, like an infinite paper. Like you have to assume the borders of the paper because at some point you get out of the paper, like you're painting on the table at some point. So it's a given, I think. But it's more like the relationship with the thing I'm drawing. Like, for example, if I'm planning to draw a figure in a landscape and then I start with the fountain pen, I start from, I don't know, the head of the figure. Normally I do it too big, then the landscape is not fitting in. So that's my problem. I would need more paper around, and then I would expand the drawing, and then I would add more paper around and expand the drawing and more paper, and then it's like it's impossible. Like no, you have to contain it. Like it's important. The frame is the most important, And with drawing, I think it's more. This fact is very obvious in the sense that for me a drawing is something like the paper is just a support. but you could actually remove that support and put a black one or a yellow one on any other color, any other kind of paper, and you could still rise up the drawing like as if it was like a wire, you know, in on a void. But it's also like it's a way of seeing, you know, like with your eyes. It's a way of using your eyes while you're drawing. I think it's like drawing has that, like this flattening of reality, and then you the paper is assumed, but it could be any other paper or any other material, or it could be a wall, or it could be directly the frame, and then you draw on a board of the frame. I'm a painter. I'm a flat earther, you know, like the frame is the paint, is the painting. Damn it! No, of course. I'm joking, but you know, it's for me, the painting is a frame, actually. That's like the frame of reference, like, and the format. That's also why my exhibition now, there is like an installation instead of just white cube and paintings on top, because in a way, I think every painter or every draftman needs to assume the frame, but there's also a desire to get out of the frame. And so for me, like the effect of the white cube on paintings in a painting exhibition is the same as the effect of the paper on a drawing. It's just a support and you assume it. You don't think about it. And it could be another one. You could exchange it for another one, you know? So what I'm doing is like covering the all walls and like breaking on the white cube. Yeah, and then I'm putting the paintings on top of that.
It felt constrained and smothering, this need to conform to a size of a paper and the shape of the canvas, until I understood that it is part of the game. It's like a game of cards whose combinations are incredibly vast but contained by the rules of a game, which reduces the possibilities but makes it far more enjoyable because it allows you to have an effect on the outcome and also to let the outcome affect you. Marina's exhibition at the El Chico Gallery in Madrid is an all-over installation where the walls are completely covered with a painting, with brown tree trunks and a deep dark blue sky on one side, and on the other a brown-red crepuscular atmosphere, as if going from the beginning to the end of the day. The floor is also painted in a deep but sort of luminous blue, with darker lines like rings in a body of water. And there are also paintings on the floor. Marina mentioned the reference to the history and fictional narratives that we carry, but working from prints and somehow stealing them, what impact does her technique, Anouk's technique, have on the past, how we see it, and current stories? What is drawing then, if it is so vast a field that it extends to engraving, photocopying, performing a sort of discipline to actually see through the hand?
It's like a slow thinking. Drawing's like thinking very slow, you know? Like you wander around a page. And sometimes, like for the kind of drawing that I do, which is like expressionist material, expressionist drawing, sometimes people tend to believe that it's like, because it's gestural, it means it's fast. But it's not fast necessarily, you know. Why fountain pen, actually? Yeah, maybe it has to do with some kind of tradition where you learn. I don't know, but you know what I mean? Yeah, so the thing is that when I learned how to draw, it was important that you couldn't correct the drawings with this. Like you cannot erase it and make it back right again. You know what I mean? So you could learn what was wrong about the drawing. And so it has something very emancipatory for me, in this sense of like, once the line is done, that's it. There's no correction. And it's very beautiful in the sense of a practice as a kind of performative aspect, you know, like once it's done, so that's it. So you commit to the line. And that's beautiful. And then sometimes they are shitty drawings, you know, that's also fine. Like, you don't need to share them all. You don't need, like, you can destroy them. That's fine. Just calmly destroy them. I destroyed many drawings. I had many, many bad ideas, you know, that didn't work.
I'm curious about the situations where the tools used come to us unexpectedly and enter the studio or a particular project. And this at the most unexpected of times.
This is before we had children, and Max was not my husband, he was my partner, but he said to me, "You're working too much, I have to take you away for a weekend to Wales." And honestly, it was a very busy time, and I was like very reluctant to go. And I was like, oh, I just want to be in my studio. So he took me to this tiny village in Wales, can't remember what it's called. There was nothing there. And I entered this holiday, self-imposed holiday, quite reluctantly, to be honest with you. But anyway, when we were there, walking in this tiny town, there was this tiny shop, cafe thing, and they had this tiny section with like 2 shelves, and on there was some art materials. And you know, I looked, of course, and I found this this pen, which was really like a felt tip, brush felt tip, but this beautiful pen that came from Japan. I have no idea why this tiny shop in Wales was selling this pen. No idea. Anyway, I picked it up and spent this little weekend drawing in my sketchbook. And that went on to me starting drawing with ink and experimenting with different brushes. And I guess that's an example of time where it was really an object, a material that led, you know, to ideas within my practice, and in a completely unexpected, unlooked for kind of way. And I think the lesson I learned from that holiday was that it's actually good to get out, because sometimes, you know, you're exposed to influences you would never have expected, or you encounter material you've never, you know, encountered before. Well, the thing is, I did still end up drawing all weekends.
The joy of finding a new thing to work with is also the joy of developing a new project, which is precisely what happened with Marina.
You can think about a drawing that then you can exhibit or sell, or just put it hanging somewhere, or like a drawing as an object. And you can think of drawing as a thought to arrive to something else. So like I've done thousands and thousands of drawings in my life. Bible is called a Bible for Lilith. I can show you, but I have to go for it. Just give me a second. It's very exciting to show the Bible, because it's a very difficult object to show, actually, to exhibit. Because like, how can you exhibit this? But the thing with this object, that it started as a mistake, as a failure in a way. Like my boyfriend said, it would be great to have a sketchbook that pages are too thin, so I can trace, like I can see the next page, you know. So I thought, for his birthday, I'm gonna find like this Bible paper that is so thin. I'm gonna find a book that is blank paper, but it's like this Bible paper, so he can see what he has drawn on the prior drawing, you know, so you can see through. And so I bought it for him as a present, and then it was like super long because it came from China. And by the time he received the present, he didn't remember this idea anymore. So when he got it, he was like, a Bible? What the fuck are you giving? Like, why? You know, it's like, and then it was like so stupid because it was coming from China. It got stopped at customs. So then we had to like cross the whole Berlin to pick this shit up. And then when he opened it, like, oh, my present finally, like, I don't know, like 2 months delay of his birthday or whatever. Then he was like, a Bible? Why? You know? So I was just like, okay, forget about it. It's so stupid. Stupid, very stupid. Like it turned
I know what
completely
you did.
ridiculous.
That was for you. It was not for him.
Yeah, and aware of it, I bought it for myself. But anyways, I kept it. In any case, like, anyways, so that doesn't matter. What matters is that I kept it, and it's like almost 500 drawings. Yeah, so I spent a couple of years doing this. It has like a golden spine, all these little thingies as a real Bible, And then I started, okay, I'm gonna do some erotic drawings here because, like, haha, I'm very radical, whatever. And then at some point you realize that you have to commit or you don't continue, But like at some point you decide if you are gonna really do 500 drawings or really no, and then you stop now. But but like to leave it half is shit. So just like whether you committed or not, and I did. I committed. Yeah, and so the thing is that like it started. You can see a bit of development. Okay, so Lilith is like the first woman of the Bible. So in the Bible, like there is a sentence at the beginning of the Genesis saying, God grabbed, I don't know, I'm paraphrasing, of course, but God grabbed a piece of a lump of clay and then cut it in half, and then it was like creating woman and a man. Because this is like pre-biblical text. Like Lilith is pre-biblical text. So in like these like versions, like Jewish versions of the Genesis, some versions of the Bible kept this sentence, this like very mysterious sentence, but it's like God created the human by its image and look or something like that, female and male, he created them. And then so that was the first idea, was like grab a lump of clay, you cut it in half, you have woman and you have man. And then this man was Adam, this woman was Lilith. And Lilith was a rebel. And she wanted to fuck on top. That's what it says in the stories, to lead sex activity. And Adam wanted to have a missionary position, like a regular. He wanted to be on top. She wanted to be on top too. So they have a fight of power because Adam wants her to be a bit minor, and then she wants to be equal. So she runs away from heaven, from the paradise, which is very funny. It's a funny thing. Like she runs away from paradise. Wasn't it the best place to be? It was like the best place to be. No, she didn't want to be there. Exactly. And so she runs away and she goes to the Red Sea. And then she starts to live there, and there's like a bunch of demons, and she fucks them all. And then she has tons of babies. They say like she has 100 babies a day. That's what it says in the story. Yeah, she was something. And so Adam gets bored, and he tries to confraternize with animals. That's what it says, really. I'm not with animals, with the animals around, to see if he can like get along. And of course, he cannot find the comfort. And so he asked God to bring her back. God sends 4 angels, I think, to bring her back. And the angels go to the Red Sea to bring Lilith back. She's super busy. She moved on. She doesn't give a fuck about Adam anymore. And then the angels come to pick her up, and she's like, fuck you, I'm not going. I'm staying here. So the story says that the angels, they, as a revenge, they kill all her kids. And then because God cannot find a solution for Lilith to come back to the paradise, then he thinks that, okay, then let's make a woman, but out of your body. So it's a bit of a minor from the birth. And then he creates Eva.
Time and dedication to a project come with the type of final outcome one ends up creating. But if we invert this logic, it may as well be that Marina found a state of completion which could apply to such a no mistake kind of work. On the other hand, her interest in the erotic, the body, and sex also found a place where it could exist.
I feel the responsibility of, I think art can be very ethical or unethical praxis, because sex is a very, very delicate subject indeed, because it's also like, it can be very aggressive for many, many people, and you are making it visible, and it's something that is supposed to be in the intimate sphere, right? And so, but then at the same time, because it's in the intimate sphere, like for many decades, it hasn't been talked about, and then that has led many people to dangerous situations because of lack of sex education. But then at the same time, if you're drawing it, you are like making it visible for everyone to see. And that's it's also, I'm responsible for that. And I understand too, like it can be highly pleasurable and highly dangerous for many people. And at the same time also, like there is some connection between pleasure and pain. I think that's interesting. But then at the same time, I also understand that there are some channels where you shouldn't be able to show sex, because I don't want to be scrolling down Instagram and then all of a sudden find an erection, like boom, on like a porno image. I don't want that either, like it has to be, it's very aggressive, like I'm not in the mood. Like, why? You're not asking about it.
Time for a short break to let you into the Exhibitionista studio. Look around you. There is a computer, a good mic, the software in the computer, which is a sort of virtual space through which you and I meet with a time and space delay. Then there are my books and 2 perfectly round Flintstones. All the magic happens here. I've been talking to a university whose students need placements, and I could use some assistance with production and research, while also mentoring the future professionals of the field. But for that, I have to pay them, and that's where you come in. Do you know how much a membership costs? A mere £25 a year, which means that you pay £2 a month. £25 for a whole year. When you buy a catalogue, that's the average price for one single book with 2 texts. If you become a member of Exhibitionistas through a platform called Substack, you not only get to support Exhibitionistas, but you also receive on average about 18 more texts minimum that I will have written about many, many, many fascinating topics of contemporary art, philosophy of art, and many other subjects. There's a little bonus that I added, which is getting to ask me questions. I'm very, very happy to do the research for you, or to dig into my little well of knowledge and put the information out there for you. I can name you, or you can be anonymous, so you get to put me to work, as long as the questions and the prompts you give me are within my abilities and the research material available to me. Otherwise, you can go to donor box in the description notes. You can just donate one time, very, very small amounts. That's what I do with Wikipedia. Once in a while, I put some money in there because I use it almost daily. And I want to reward people who nourish me. Thank you for spending some time with me here in my studio. Thank you for considering this decent proposal. On with the episode. This question of control, controlling the space where images are, who sees them and where, reverts back also to the freedom of creating and the discipline of release and tension in creative processes. Imagination must flow, but technique must shape it, although not too much. Ideas must preside, but perhaps not on a conscious level. Stories are present, but are they at the start or at the end of the final outcome?
If you put some acetone onto a photocopier and you push it around, you start seeing the pigments moving like dust. So you can make little piles of dust or move it around. And what I love about that is that it meets at that point graphite, which is the other thing that I use, the other tool that I use. And it means, especially now, recently, Faber-Castell has, I've got them here, has created these pit graphite mats, so that they're making graphite pencils now that don't reflect. So if you color with them, they're very, very matte. My pencil of choice, but so this is very reflective, this is not. And basically, these new pencils with toner carbon powder, it looks and feels like the same thing. And now I can blend them seamlessly. It's kind of like taking my work in a slightly different, well, a little bit of a different direction, because I can now rework photocopies and images, and you can't tell that I've reworked them because the graphite, this graphite is very much like the carbon powder. Part of why I find this process interesting, because I am actually taking, prints, mainly etchings, really. So basically reproduction on so many levels. There is the original etching that has been reproduced itself several times, usually to make additions. And then they have been reproduced in art books. I have the art books. I then reproduce the reproductions of the reproductions through a photocopier. And what I'm interested in as well is the dilution of the image through that process of reproduction. And when you reproduce images, in the final stages, at my stage on a photocopier, it is further diluted because actually, the photocopies transfer more or less well. So some of them get distressed or, slightly damaged. But also, this is where the acetone part is interesting, because depending on many factors, the acetone moves, transfers the toner more or less. So I had another moment of like, oh my goodness, it's not working. Why? Because I have moved to France partly because I have now a house with a big barn that's going to be a great studio, and we're working on it. But for now, it's very much an empty barn with no heating. And last winter, me, I was like out there with my, duffel coat making. And my transfers were not working. And I was like, no, why are they not working? Yeah, and I was like, not this again. And in the end, I realized, I came to the conclusion after trying lots of different things, that it was actually that it was the acetone that at a lower temperature, basically under 10 degrees, acetone doesn't really work as well. For the toner to transfer, the acetone needs to be strong, and it needs to be more than 10 degrees. So, so all this to say that, when I am transferring the photocopies, the image gets altered, and factors like the temperature on the day, the how diluted or not the acetone is, what brush I use as well, how hard I press, all of these things influence the transfer of the image. And to an extent, over many years now, I control this. So I know if I use this type of pressure on this type of image photocopied at this, because, on a photocopier, you can alter how light or dark the photocopy comes out. So I also play with this. I've also always done very, very nearly hyper realistic graphite drawings. So that's all about control, This aspect, in contrast, the fact that I can never fully control, even though I've tried for years, I never have control over the final transfer, is actually a huge, nearly like a relief to me. It makes the making exciting because I'm going to respond to the transfer. Sometimes it does something I'd never anticipated before. And then those marks, the transfers, which I then draw over, they will inform the drawing to an extent. So I'm responding to the unpredictability of the transfer. And I love that way of working. For me, it feels very liberating. I would say, that half of my practice is too tight. And I think, when drawings are too stiff or too, in inverted commas, perfect, or trying, hyper-realism. I mean, this is not a criticism of hyper-realism. I need to work that way because it's partly how I learn to draw. When I observe something really, really intensely, I understand it. So for me, it's a necessary exercise that I really enjoy, the drawing, really realistically. But it's extremely tight. And when I work that way, I'm always thinking, that's great, but actually you need to loosen up. You need to let, art, I always think of art in a scientific way. You need space for experimentation, because it's when you experiment or you play that things you hadn't thought about occur, or, where you kind of get into that flow state of things come to you, etc. So all this to say that if tomorrow my photocopier breaks down and that's it, I know that I would be already, and I have already started looking for another technique, method that brings that element of unpredictability in the transfer or in the way it works. I think an important part of the process for me is thinking about how that whole precious side of art making, especially in Europe, that the etchings, they're like really laborious art making techniques, and people thought I should try etching and I might like it, but I actually didn't, because it's so tight and laborious. And I think there was this whole thing about these master printmakers, of the 18th century, and this kind of reverence to print. And I adore those artists. I adore their prints. But a big part of the way I'm working now and with the photocopier is being able to be playful about those references, those images and those techniques. And I think one of the main things, and I've no answer to this, but that always kind of results from this relationship that I have, is whether people think my work is print or not. Because it's not print in the sense there isn't this, people will say, but there's not that labor intensive side of it, because I'm just transferring an image. I started referencing the artist whose work I'm appropriating, so that people know it's a deliberate, wanted collaboration, not that I'm trying to kind of, and also to bring that artist, to new audiences, I suppose. I've realized that all the reference material that I have, it's all male artists. And so I've been wanting to use female printmakers.
When you are a female painter, because it's like you are carrying the weight of all the tradition made by male.
I try and draw every day, even after my kids are in bed, or and having those two ways of working has allowed me to keep making at all times. But it was already something I did anyway, but it's been reinforced by, having to keep making in that sense. I think drawing teaches you to really see. It's hard to explain to people what seeing really truly is, but, for example, go and draw water, and then when you look at water, you will never see it the same way. You see it in kind of areas of light and dark, broken up, movement, and it just adds a layer. I don't know. I feel like I see the world more intensely. If you study something and you draw it, you then, it's like on a daily basis. Even if I'm not drawing from observation, when I look at things, I feel like, you're always sort of deconstructing and trying to understand what you're actually seeing.
It was fascinating listening to such different artists with different experiences of drawing, art making, and exhibition spaces. I'm surprised to see how observational drawing for them is linked with seeing and how it pervades their day-to-day life. What I mean by that is, obviously, if you observe and you draw, it has to do with seeing. But there is a real dynamic between having drawn and then seeing the world in a completely different way. I connected a lot with Anouk, saying that even when she's going about her life, she is indeed seeing the world through potential drawings. I'm always writing a story in my head, taking mental notes and recording little segments. Recently, I spoke with a multimedia artist who told me that his drawings didn't translate his music, or vice versa, his notations. They came with it. The more we expand our experiences and the arts, the more we're carried and carry a wider and richer form of engagement, which we take to our lives and our actions, perhaps. It doesn't make us better people, probably, but it certainly seems to make us more disposed to engage with the world, to wonder and to be curious. As for the characteristics of 21st century art as opposed to Raphael's time, I hope I brought some proximity between them rather than radically separating them. If you think about it, nothing has changed much since the caves in who we are and what we take from our technologies. As ever, it's a game of push and pull, with perhaps now a more acute awareness of the danger in the use of certain materials and the overpowering presence that they have on the planet. Would this be the reason why Marina and Anouk focus on the landscape and stories of the past while subtly making them hybrid, oniric, and ambivalent? What I don't know what to make of is the writing spectre that, in a sense, haunts their work. It's probably just me projecting my own language onto their art, but it did seem that the photocopier and the fountain pen have that memory of the written and the distributed word. What do you think? This is it. I hope you enjoyed this new segment as much as I enjoyed editing it, preparing it, researching it, and particularly talking to the two artists, Anouk Mercier and Marina Roca, who were so generous with their time. And you out there, I hope you took something from it. I'm really curious to know what you thought of this episode. So leave a comment, send an email, sign up for the newsletter, follow us on Instagram. There's so many ways to reach us and to make suggestions. Tell us what you thought, and perhaps also share a few ideas that you may have had while listening to the episode. Take care, have a good one. I'll see you in a couple of weeks with another brand new episode. Take care.